Hello, I'm Szczepanski, and you're watching The Capitol on Live One TV. Today, I'm joined by a U.S. Congressional candidate who proudly promotes the hashtag Not Black, Not White, American. He is a businessman, philanthropist, activist, and devoted patriot, sincere in his quest to reinvigorate the American spirit. Darius Mayfield, thank you for joining us on The Capitol.
Thank you for having me, Tara. Always a good time with you.
Fantastic, and I'm sure we're going to have a great time educating our viewers as to your congressional run. And before we dive into it, can you give everybody a background? What has inspired you, and why did you make the decision to run for U.S. Congress?
Sure. I'm Darius Mayfield. I am running for New Jersey's 12th Congressional seat. And basically, I decided to run for a lot of reasons. I mean, one of the reasons I give is when I was younger, probably third, fourth, fifth grade, my mother used to ask me and my little sister all the time when we came home from school what you wanted to be when you grew up. And my answer every time was President of the United States. So I think I always had some type of political inclination, and there was something inside of me. One of my older cousins, Danny Mayfield, God rest his soul, who died some time ago, was actually a councilman out in Tennessee. He was very inspiring for me, and I kind of modeled my campaign after his a bit, where he was going up against a multi-term incumbent, and he really just came out of nowhere with no money and just had the love of the people, had the right message, and he beat him, and he beat him pretty bad. And he's very beloved in the state of Tennessee right now. They named the park after him and everything. So that was definitely an inspiration for me. To more of the immediate reason why is because, especially over the last 4 or 5 years, just watching what this country has gone through, just watching how our elected officials out there were so comfortable disparaging their constituents, whether they agreed with them or not, from Joe Biden calling us Neanderthals to Hillary Clinton calling us deplorables. You know, I just thought it really just showed a lack of class, a lack of tact, and that's not how we want to be represented on the world stage, and that's not how we want to be represented by our elected officials. So to see that, and just to see how disparaging they were, and just to see how easily they were that disparaging and how comfortable they became doing these things, was really a trigger for me to just say, you know what? Let me throw my hat in the ring and let me get in there and try to change this, you know, try to give the people something different and lead through example, you know, not by talk. And I love what my man Scott Presser says, stop talking, start doing. It's really more so about getting out there, getting on the campaign trail, and hopefully, if I'm blessed enough, ultimately getting to the House of Representatives to show people that change rather than just telling them about it. And, you know, I'll definitely give a kudos to my man Billy Prempe, because it was actually after I had a conversation with him that actually motivated me to make the final decision to jump in. So after that conversation, I was really motivated, and I said, you know what? He did it. I love what he's been doing so far, so let me just jump in. Let's go in there and just give him hell.
Exactly. So we can make a change to the Republican Party and also our current leadership. As you were mentioning, some of the rhetoric that's used by Biden and by Clinton has been very divisive. Now, you're a proponent of the hashtag Not Black, Not White, American.
Yes.
Can you explain what that hashtag means and what's the inspiration behind it?
Yeah, I'm very proud of that hashtag. The way it came about is I actually, when I first jumped into the political arena 4 or 5 years ago, when Trump first got elected, you know, I wanted to do something. At first, I thought I was going to be in media, whatever the case is. So I actually ended up getting introduced to Sean Hannity's management team and his executive producer, Linda, and her partner, Blair. And I went to their office and had a conversation with them. And this is where we were just going over some ideas, how we wanted to do this, how we wanted to roll it out. And they're like, you have to come up with a tagline. So 2 minutes later, I'm just sitting there. I'm just like, you know what? Not black, not white, American. And that's really how it was birthed, to be honest with you. Since that day, we have, 10,000 plus reshares and retweets on that hashtag. Very proud of that, because it just shows me that people really identify and connect with that message. And basically, it means what it says. You know, I'm a pretty straightforward guy, and that's what I want to bring to Congress. That's what I want to bring to politics. I don't talk around things. I don't, you know, try to polish things up. I'm just a pretty straightforward guy. It means, you know, it's country before color, you know, country before race at the end of the day. And I know, you know, I've had one experience where a couple of black people have, and literally only one or two, approached me and said, you know, well, Darius, how could you say that, man? You know, everything we've been through in this country, how could you, you know, put this country, America, before your own people? It's not about that at all. We're all human beings at the end of the day. We're all Americans at the end of the day. We all have gone through this experience together. Our ancestors, especially mine, both of my great-grandfathers were 100% Native American who ended up marrying free slaves. So, my family goes back generations in this country, a lot of generations in this country. And, I would never sit here and downplay and disrespect the trials and tribulations those before me, went through, before this time we're in now. And a lot of those people were fighting to make us one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And to me, that means we are all American. So at the end of the day, one of the unfortunate things, especially over the last 4 or 5 years, is seeing some of our politicians and how they so easily race bait people, and they're just pitting one group against the other, whether it's black versus white, Asians versus white people, whatever, gays versus straight, whatever it is. And, I want to start to see some of that stuff subside. And I want to be part of the reason why it does substantially and very quickly. And you coming out with something not black, not white American, I think is one way to begin that. I think for the most part, the overwhelming majority of people that hear that understand exactly what it means. And yes, there's going to have to be some people that you explain those things to, but just to the black community out there, it doesn't mean that I think about my race any less, than anybody else that happens to be black in this country. I love my people. I love the American people. I love human beings as a whole. And at the end of the day, not black, not white American is more of a means to just bring us all together and put us all on the same level playing field, which we all should be.
We heard Biden speak about unity. Do you feel that he's achieving that unity since he's been put into office? And if not, what can we do to achieve true unity?
Come on, man. Biden, unity, those words are not synonymous, man. This is the guy that authored the 94 crime bill. This is the guy that gave the eulogy at the last known KKK member's funeral, Mr. Robert Byrd. This is the guy that said he didn't want to desegregate schools because he didn't want his kids in a racial jungle. Listen, and I was talking about this the other day on an interview. It's kind of sad that I see black people running around calling this guy Pop Pop. After hearing stuff like that, it's just like, it just speaks to the PTSD in our community and some of the things that we've kind of gone through, where sometimes we just don't accept reality for what it is. We just don't understand the reality of the situation, and that's why I said one of the things I mentioned was I'm a straightforward guy. What you hear is what you get. What you see is what you get. People like Joe Biden, they're masters at playing politics. You can't sit here and put forth bills that have locked up tens of thousands of my own people, kind of like Kamala Harris. The fact that she, from what I saw, she locked up the most black people of any prosecutor in her district, in the history of her district. These things aren't happening by accident. So I'm more about, the actions of people rather than the words of people. And yes, we hear some good words when Joe Biden can get out a good word or two, because for the most part, he can't even put together complete sentences, to be honest with you. But what these guys are doing, pushing this race narrative, continuing to race bait people, continuing to ostracize a group, let's say like the Trumpers, that, maybe some of them went to the Capitol, whatever the case is, but there was no guns, for the most part. No matter what they tell you, there wasn't that much violence, but yet they want to ostracize them and they want to make them enemy number one and even train their people to call people like that terrorists. But then on the other side, you have groups like Antifa and Black Lives Matter going through neighborhoods, literally burning down their own neighborhoods. And you have people like Maxine Waters joining them on the ground and encouraging them to do even more. So that's also a big reason why I decided to run, because I understood that politics is really being playing with people's, heads and their brains. Propaganda is really being used on people, and it's been being used on all of us for a long, long time. But it's time for especially the inner city communities, the brown and the black communities, to understand that they have choices, and it's time for them to leverage their power. Stop listening to what these people are telling you and start watching what they're doing. Start watching the bills that they're putting forth that ultimately affect us all. And it's been affecting us in very negative ways. So, again, unity is not a word that I align closely with Miss Kamala Harris or Mrs. Kamala Harris or Mr. Joe Biden. I think their plan is working, and their plan is to conquer and divide at the end of the day, because in the end, and part of the reason they have to do that is because they know they're the minority. They are the minority when it comes to Democrats in this country, when it comes to their way of thinking. For the most part, even within the black community, we are a very conservative thinking people. We are very nationalistic people to a certain degree. We love this country. Yes, we've been through a lot of stuff, but at the end of the day, we also recognize the opportunities we have because we're here in this country now. So when you ask me, do I look at him as a unifying figure, it's, I kind of rather just sit here and laugh about it, but I understand we're being interviewed, so I got to give some type of answer. So
come on,
no,
man.
Come on, man. That was just like the only thing I could really say in the beginning. But no, I don't look at him as a unifying force, and in fact, I think he's tearing apart the fabric of this country even more, which is very ironic because we just got over 4 years of them telling us another man was doing that, when in actuality, that really wasn't the case. One of the good things, though, is I think, again, it's a lot of propaganda, a lot of mind games being played. But when it comes to the reality of the situation, I don't think what they propagate on TV, what they show us on TV, is the absolute reality of what we're living. I, like everybody here, go to supermarkets every day. I go do laundry, whatever the case is, and you don't really experience racism or prejudice on a daily basis. In fact, I would dare to say that most kids in my generation, most millennials and things like that, have probably never experienced racism in their lives, but yet they're being fed this on TV over and over and over again, which is conditioning their brains to think and, to think these things. And another reason why I got into this, because one of the saddest things I saw over the last 4 or 5 years was every time you would turn on a CNN, every time you would turn on an MSNBC, it would be some talking head up there, usually a white liberal, that's telling black and brown kids every reason why they can't do something. The boogeyman's coming to get you. The KKK's coming to get you. You won't be able to do it because the white man's this, the white man's that. And these things are purposely done because they want to continue to condition these kids so they can have their thumb on them, so they're voting, for their policies, for their party, and to kind of just keep things going the way they are. And it's time for change. We want change. We need change. And going forward, we're going to demand that change.
Absolutely. I think to a point that you made about the conditioning that's occurring based on what people are seeing in the media versus what the reality is. And I think back to a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to an individual who was coming at me during a street interview. And so I diverted my attention away from her and I started speaking to another individual and who was not coming at me. And so the woman that was coming at me, she said, "Oh, you're not talking to me because I'm black, and you're talking to the other woman because she's a lighter skinned woman." And I said to her, it's because she's not yelling at me and then
she's not being obnoxious.
Yeah, she's not being obnoxious and attacking me. So I think of also like as a mixed Asian person in America, like it's if I was told that everything was because of my skin color, then I would not look to any of my own personal actions. And I think that's a disconnect that we're having in our society. And then another interesting point that I want to circle back to that you had mentioned earlier is, again, to the reality of what people are seeing on television versus what is the reality of the day, the violence that we're actually experiencing on a day-to-day in our community with BLM and Antifa. There are daily riots that occur in Portland, previously in Minneapolis, when the media is still talking about January 6th as a riot. How do you feel that's going to impact our views or mainstream, like everybody in our community? How does that impact us?
I mean, it definitely impacts people, I think more so the upcoming generations, and that's what this is really about, because those younger generations are the most impressionable ones, Us as adults and people, my age, older, things like that, we can, even though, it's becoming less and less nowadays, but we can usually critically think and draw back on our experiences and, try to have some understanding of what's really going on as opposed to what's being fed to us on a daily basis. But these kids, they're growing up in the social media world. They're growing up in the technology world. So to them, technology, TV, those things is like God. They believe whatever they see at the end of the day. So a lot of those kids are being conditioned to think this is the way. You know, we're gonna go out in the street, we're gonna be violent. If we don't like what one person says, we're gonna make sure we dox them, we're gonna go to their house, we're gonna destroy their lives and things like that. And that's a very dangerous, scary place to be. And you know, I relate it even to our police situation sometimes in this country right now. You know, certain police, because we know most police are good people, they're not all bad, but certain police have to understand that it's a new day. You know, if you do certain things, if you're acting out in certain ways, you know, anybody can be reached nowadays. We have social media, your address can be found, you can be doxxed, whatever the case is. So we're really living in a very sensitive, turbulent, pretty much virtual reality right now where, you know, people's information can be leaked, people can be gotten to. So it's a very dangerous thing to see when you keep seeing these things played over and over. And one of the things I always talk about is, it's so interesting because, as you said, Minneapolis, you know, certain cities, it's like a handful of cities, but at the end of the day, that's not anywhere near the overwhelming majority of the country. For the overwhelming majority of the country, we still see our families every day, we go to work, we go to school, you know, well, in some cases, since they got them shut down and everything, but, you know, you're not really seeing that. Like, if I could literally pretty much go anywhere in New Jersey right now, I'm not going to see that type of stuff. But when these kids see it on TV, their minds automatically go to, okay, this is what it is. This is how we move forward. And if that movement keeps building momentum and keeps building steam, these impressionable kids are going to become monsters, and it's just going to be the reality that we're not living right now is going to become reality eventually if that keeps, you know, spreading out and those things keep getting inflamed. And I blame our elected officials, especially on the Democratic side. I blame our media. You know, I know it was looked at as controversial, but I think Trump really hit it on the head when he said the media is the enemy of the people. You know, by you doing these things, by you propagating these guys, you are literally putting all of our lives in danger. You are literally jeopardizing all of our livelihoods. You know, everybody, no matter if you're Democrat, Republican, independent, at the end of the day, a lot of us want the same things: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those older generations also want their kids to have better opportunities and more opportunities than they had. Well, by perpetuating the stuff that we're perpetuating now and putting this out there, those doors are going to close very quick as you see them closing, because the kids are not even concerned with reality anymore. You know, let's talk about, you know, police shootings. When you look at the statistics, you know, we really shouldn't be out there, you know, rioting for these issues right now. We should be in Chicago. We should be in the Newark, New Jersey. We should be in the inner city, you know, rioting for our own people and standing up for our own people that are being shot in mass, literally. I mean, in 2019, you had about 240 black people killed by police. Of those 240 people, anywhere from 75 to like 85, 90% of those were what we call justified shootings, meaning they ran up in a crack house, they were being shot out, they shot back. Normal things that happen every day in a country as big as this where a lot of people have guns. Great. Of those 240, I think it was like 5 or 6 people that were actually unarmed that were killed. And listen, one is more than we should have. So I understand that. I have empathy towards that cause as well. But so 240 black people in 2019. That's in the entire country. That's for the entire year. In the last 3 or 4 weeks, there's been more people than that shot in the city of Chicago. One city and one state over the matter of 3 or 4 weeks. I mean, I think one of the things, and this goes to your question as well, one of the things that the perpetuation of this stuff does is it desensitizes us to a lot of things, you know, because anybody with a fair mind listening to those statistics would be like, well, yeah, that's kind of extreme. That's crazy. You got 240 killed in 1 year in the entire country. Let's say you got 250 shot in 3 weeks in one city by their own people. I mean, those things just don't balance each other out. That's going from one extreme to the other. That's a very extreme thing. It's a very sad thing. It's a very detrimental thing. And this is something that's been going on for not just now, generation after generation. So if we keep letting them put us in these cycles, we will just keep going down the tubes, killing ourselves. And, you know, ultimately, I guess their plan will be complete of getting this socialist utopia that they want, and just, you know, those at the top thrive and those at the bottom just kind of fight for the scraps.
When I think of how they're going after our children and our youth, it's within the schools. We have critical race theory being taught, for instance, and we're being told that everything is related to race. Voter IDs, are they racist?
No, voter ID is not racist. It's actually racist to say that voter ID is racist. I mean, I seen a Fox News segment where they went into Harlem. We're in New York right now, so we'll talk about Harlem. They were in Harlem. And before they went to Harlem, they went to, I forget where it was, a Williamsburg College or something, and they talked to a bunch of white kids, and they were basically asking them about the whole voter ID thing, and pretty much every single one of them was like, oh my God, that's so racist. How can we keep doing this to black people, da 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 da. And then he went to Harlem, and he started talking to black people, and he said, well, listen, first of all, do you have an ID? Everybody said, yeah, and they looked at him kind of weird when he asked that. They're like, yeah, and then he asked, okay, do you know how to get to the DMV to get an ID if you want? He said, yeah, it's like 3 blocks from here, you make it right there, and in fact, in New York, they're free, right? And he said, do you feel offended by me even asking you this? He said, yeah, because what would make you think I don't know how to get an ID? Let me tell you, I have a big family. My grandmother and grandfather had 15 kids. I got over 80-something first cousins, and most of us were born right here in New Jersey. None of them don't have an ID. They all have IDs, every single one of them. Now, I do like to always look at the other side of the coin. I do understand that there are probably some remote areas in this country, especially in the deep South, maybe a deep Mississippi, Alabama, places like that, where resources are even more scarce, and maybe some of those people don't have the means to get to those things. But guess what? It's not just black people. There's poor white people in those same rural areas that have the same issues. In fact, in this country, there's a lot more poor white people than there are black people, just based off the sheer numbers. So I do understand that side of things, and I do understand there is that small minority of people that may have that issue. And you know what? Shame on those politicians, in those towns that have let that continue to go on. And that's why we're doing what we're doing now. We need to replace those politicians to make sure we put people in there that actually get things done at the end of the day. But to continue asking people about voter ID and asking them, making it seem like they don't have access or they're not smart enough to get an ID is very racist. And for the overwhelming majority of black people, from what I've seen, they feel the same way no matter what CNN tells you at the end of the day, because just talking to people on the ground and just going to look at some interviews, you'll very quickly find that the majority of black people and brown people in this country have IDs.
What role do you see the black community playing in the upcoming election, or even in your election?
Yeah, well, I guess when you say upcoming, you mean what, like the next?
U.S. Congressional election for 2022.
So I think it's going to play a big part. One of the things, it's time for black people in this country to really understand and recognize their role and their power in this country. I was talking about it the other day with someone, and basically the numbers break down like this. There's like 200 million plus Caucasians in this country. There's like 60 to 70 million Hispanic people in this country. There's like 40 to 50 million black people in this country. And then when you go to the other side of the scale, there's a couple of million Muslims in this country. There's like 5 million Jews in this country. There's like 3 or 4 million Asians in this country. So our numbers far exceed the majority of, the races in this country. And that's to be had because we were brought here as slaves. We've been here for generation after generation after generation. But we've been so propagated and so used and abused, for so long that we just can't seem to bring it all together, right? And become, connected in our efforts to really see real progress. Even when you talk about the Hispanic community, within that 60, 70 million Hispanics, that's all different. That accounts for everybody. So whether you're Cuban, Puerto Rican, Mexican, Colombian, that's a lot of different races within that number. When we talk about that 40 to 50 million African Americans, we are talking about direct descendants of slaves for the most part, for the overwhelming majority, actual black people that have been here generation after generation after generation. We have a lot more power than a lot of us realize at the end of the day. And one of the ways to harness that power is to understand that you don't have to be a slave to one party, because no other race is. As a Hispanic, they've been voting pretty much a split vote for a long time. A lot of Hispanics are very conservative. They're very religious people. A lot of them vote Republican. Same thing for Indian Americans, same thing for Jewish Americans, but we're the only culture in the black community that turns around and actually, labels the people that, have a different opinion than us, Uncle Tom or a coon or this and that. So, that's very detrimental to our future, especially when you're seeing things like this illegal immigration issue, which is heavily going to affect the black community. I mean, if people don't wake up quick, our vote really is not going to matter as much as it once did, which is, I think, by design. That's why you heard Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, when they first got into office, one of the first things they wanted to do was go ahead and legalize all these millions of people that are either here undocumented right now, or even some of the people that are currently trying to come over, and in hopes that that will become their permanent voting bloc, which would give them a lot of power as far as winning elections and winning races going forward. So as far as my personal election, I can tell you right now, I'm going to need independents, I'm going to need Democrats, I'm going to need whites, I'm going to need blacks, I'm going to need Jewish people, I'm going to need, Polish people, I'm going to need everybody in order to win my election. And I'm not blind to that. I understand that. I understand that as fact. And one of the ways I want to do that is just kind of doing what I'm doing with you now. Just always looking at both sides of the coin, being reasonable in my assessments, reasonable in my solutions, and having people understand that I am a regular guy, right, that has a love for everybody, especially this country, especially the American people. I have a love for my people as far as African American people. I have a love for the Hispanic community, a love for the Caucasian community, a love for the Polish community. I love everybody, especially, our American family at the end of the day, but I'm never going to be afraid to speak my truth or give it to you the way I see it or the way I think you should understand it at the end of the day. So, if it comes to the conversation of cops and police reform, listen, at the end of the day, I know every cop is not good, every cop is not bad. Every black person is not good, every black person is not bad. But at the end of the day, we have problems to fix on all sides. We don't just want to focus on one side. I'm not just gonna sit here and say, you know what, back to blue all the time, they're always good. No, we're gonna judge each individual situation on its own merit. But at the same time, I'm not gonna also just sit here and say, well, black people, we're just killing ourselves anyway, so whatever the case is. No, we are, but then there's the other side to it. Of those 40 to 50 million black people in this country, over 52% of us live in middle class neighborhoods. There's a very affluent black, constituency in this country. We're not all just on Section 8 from the hood, poor. There's again, over 50% of us live in a middle class neighborhood. So, I'm just going to continue to be real and thoughtful in my approach to everything. And, to Democrats out there, also understand that you're not going to always agree with me. I mean, I am running as a Republican, so obviously there's going to be probably some Republican ideas that you may not agree with naturally because you're a Democrat. That doesn't mean you shouldn't vote for me. That doesn't mean I don't still have your best interests at heart. As I said before, we all, at the end of the day, want the same things, but sometimes we do have just different approaches and different ways of getting there. But just always understand that I come from those conditions. I come from inner city conditions. I come from a single parent household. I come from the drugs and the violence that a lot of people do experience nowadays. So I understand that plight. I was also fortunate enough to move to more of a suburban neighborhood later in life and understand that plight as well. So I understand the best of both worlds, and that's why I think I am the perfect person to help bridge those two things.
The things that come to mind when I'm listening now to you, Darius, is common ground and common sense.
Yeah.
What are the other key components of your platform?
Unity would be a big part of that, and it kind of ties into a lot of what we were talking about right now. But I think unity is important for me. I'm going to need it as a constituency in order to actually win this election, and we're going to need it as a country in order to move forward the way we all want to move forward, and we all want this country to grow. And just a shout out to all my brown people out there. I promise you, not black, not white. American doesn't exclude you guys. Sometimes I get teased with a little bit that, basically I'm just saying not black, not white, and I just care about black and white people. But I have a lot of brown family members, a lot of brown friends, so I promise you it encompasses everybody. It even encompasses those Italians out there. I love my Italian people.
It would make for a very long hashtag.
Absolutely.
So it's
not black,
that's
not Italian,
between.
not white, not brown, American. But no, it encompasses everybody, man. Again, at the end of the day, we're just one big American family. I really believe that no matter if you've been here for generations or you came over here legally and did it the right way and became, a naturalized citizen, at the end of the day, once you make it to that point, we are all Americans. We are all one big American family. And yeah, I mean, as far as my other platforms, I would say school choice is probably a big one of mine. I am a living example of why school choice would make such a huge difference in the life of so many. Basically, when I was in 3rd grade, I grew up in New Brunswick, New Jersey, in the hood, right across the street from the projects, and my mother sent me to an elementary school called Lord Sterling. When I was in 3rd grade, I was going to breakfast one morning with my boy Jaja, and we were just walking down the hall, and all of a sudden, some kid went in between 2 garbage cans, picked up a long knife, and started chasing us. I had no idea like why he was doing what he was doing, and it just kind of came out of nowhere, but naturally, I turned around and ran. Jaja went one way, I went another way. Luckily, my house was only a block or so away, so I ran all the way home. When I got home, I told my mother what happened, and she basically said, I'll never send you back to that school. So what she did in the following weeks to come was she got with my aunt in the city of South Brunswick, which was a upper middle class suburban neighborhood near us, and used her address to start sending me to school, to a school called Brunswick Acres. When I got to Brunswick Acres, I mean, I can just tell you, just from seeing the outside of the school, I understood there was a big difference. And this was gonna be an experience like I had never had, because up until that point, I wasn't familiar with the suburbs. I was just a kid from the hood, and that was my life. And I started going to that school, made some invaluable friendships. It was great. It was just a wonderful experience. Shout out to my teachers, Mrs. Wales and Mrs. Taylor. Yes, I remember your names. They were awesome, and really people that still stick out to me to this day. But what happened was, about a year into that experience, my mother was called into the Board of Ed, and basically he told her, we've been watching you for the last few months, and we understand and we know that your son doesn't physically live at this address. So you have 2 choices. Either you're going to pull him out of our school and you're going to send him back to New Brunswick. Now, we understand that he had a problem in New Brunswick, so we'll even allow you to do what nobody else can do, because in New Brunswick, depending on where you live, determined the school that you would actually go to. So since I lived in the new apartments, I went to Lord Sterling. So they said, we'll even let him go to any school you want to pick for him when you go back. He doesn't have to go back to Lord Sterling. Or you can continue to fight this, and we're going to charge you and fine you for everything we can for you literally breaking the law. And my mother had to take me out for a little bit, but she said she went ham on them. Like, she went really, really hard. I don't remember those specifics, but we were having a conversation about it a couple of weeks ago, and she was like, Darius, do you remember? I started going off on them. I was going in. I'm like, of course you were. Like, that's my mom. Like, she's awesome. And, so what happened was she had to take me out of school for a little bit. I ended up getting transferred to a school called Woodrow Wilson. I went to Woodrow Wilson, and listen, I didn't get to chase around with a knife, but it was more of the same. Really more of the same. You could see immediately the quality of education decrease. You could see even the teachers' engagement in school decrease, and it just wasn't a good situation. So what my mom did shortly after that was she ended up packing up all her stuff. I don't know how she did it to this day, and ended up moving us to the poorest part of that suburban neighborhood, which was right next to the trailer park in South Brunswick. So me and my sister could continue with our education and continue, just getting the education that we wanted and we deserved at the end of the day. I'll forever be grateful for that, because I was just really opened up to a world that I wouldn't experience otherwise. I became a trombone player. I joined the school band. I was in the chorus. I played sports. We used to go outside and play kickball all the time. Like, these are things, just like even my elementary school in New Brunswick, that I never would have had access to. We didn't do these things. I didn't even know what a lot of these things were. I didn't even know that these things were available to us. So I understand, having gone through that situation, how that experience really opens up the mind, the heart, and the imagination of kids, which is something that a lot of kids in these inner cities aren't receiving now. So their emotions, their hearts, their minds are just staying suppressed in that 1, 2, 3 block radius, where all they see is the gangs, the guns, the violence, the drugs, and they're really never able to even not only experience anything, but even develop the capability to understand that there is more out there. So it really keeps them limited in a lot of cases to what they can actually do. So for me, school choice is a big issue for me, because again, I'm a living example of what it does. And it's really time when I hear things like in Trenton, New Jersey, which is in my district, that in the high school out there, the proficiency rate is 3%. 3%. Again, it goes back to what we were talking about with Chicago, and there being a big difference between 240 people being shot and killed in 1 year and 240 people being shot in 3 weeks, in one city. It's the same thing. It's just these outlandish numbers that they've conditioned us to really just accept and not understand the totality of what we're talking about. That means Out of 100 kids in that school, 97 of them can't do math at their grade level. 97 out of 100 kids. So only 3 of those kids can do math and do the things they're supposed to do at the level they're supposed to do it at. And this is a town that's in my district right now, and it's shameful. You know, anybody else, try going to one of those suburban neighborhoods and going to a PTA meeting and announcing to those parents that our proficiency rate is at 3%. The board would be fired immediately. The principal would be out of there immediately. Half the teachers would be out there, and they'd identify who the good teachers are, who's doing what, and they'd all be out of there. You know, it's the same thing. We do cleanups throughout inner cities, and it's the same thing. Like, I'll go to Philadelphia, or I'll go to Newark, or I'll go to Camden, and when we go there, driving through to a Camden or a Philadelphia, you're driving through these suburban neighborhoods that are lawns perfectly manicured, trash picked up, there's no trash on the ground, you know, things look beautiful. And then a mile and a half down the road, I mean, especially in somewhere like Philadelphia, where they literally nicknamed it Filthadelphia, there's nothing but trash everywhere, nothing but homelessness, nothing but drug addicts everywhere. And this is literally a block or two away from some of the most pristine, beautiful neighborhoods you've ever seen. So they've conditioned these neighborhoods, these inner cities, to be comfortable with this. They've conditioned them to be comfortable with the corruption that's causing these things and allowing these things. Because at the end of the day, all these districts get a lot of money, you know, whether it's in the millions, billions, whatever the case is. It's just in certain places, the money is used the way it's supposed to, and there's mechanisms in place to make sure that's happening. There's engaged parents that make sure those things are happening. And in another place, the money never trickles down to the people it's supposed to trickle down to, which is the kids and their families. So with school choice, it's going to force these public institutions to do 2 things. Either shape up and get your act together, or you're gonna go out of business at the end of the day. And these parents and these kids should be able to take whatever money's allotted to them and take that money and go to a parochial school, a private school, a charter school, or another school district altogether. Because again, I am a living example that if I didn't have that opportunity, I wouldn't be sitting here with you right now. I literally wouldn't. And it's kind of a funny thing, because I always hear people say to me all the time, "You're so articulate." Sometimes I don't know if I should, you know, take that as like, because it's usually like Caucasian people saying that to me. So sometimes I'm like,
well,
really?
I think you're articulate.
Really? But, you know, I'll be honest with you. If I didn't go to those schools, if my mom didn't do that, I wouldn't be as articulate as I am. I wouldn't even be able to, you know, to frame how I really feel this way to you and speak to you in an intelligent way like this to help not only you understand, but the millions of people out there that I hope to help and affect one day. So, you know, me and my sister both owe my mother a deep debt for what she did. She's a superhero. I'm glad to see a lot of my followers are out there, because I share the story now. They love her, and they're always saying great things, and she's such a great woman. I think she really loves it, and she loves to see it. So, you know, it really is cool. And
your mother certainly fought hard for the opportunity to send you to the school that she felt that you needed to be going to, and that's certainly a characteristic. I can see that you as a U.S. congressman is going to be fighting tooth and nail for other students to have that opportunity that your mom made into a reality.
Well, you know why? It's so important, because that is the number one way that I've identified to uplift these communities. It all starts with the education. Yes, there's an economic development side of it, but it all starts with the education. If you don't know the right things to do, you can't do them.
Yes.
So if you're just being taught, you know, the same thing over, if you're just seeing the same things, the drugs, the crime, the violence, whatever the case is, more times than not, you're going to follow that same path and you're going to fall into those things. But now, if you take those same 10, 20 kids and you put them in a parochial school, you put them in a private school, and they have structure in their life, they have discipline, they're learning the right things, they are going to, more often than not, come out to be outstanding citizens in this country. And that's what we want at the end of the day. So it really makes you question. I saw an article yesterday where Democrats are starting to, as they have before, push back against this school choice idea. Basically, their argument is that and they say this with everything now, this goes back to the slave era, right? That's their argument. This is racist, it goes back to the slave era, and basically you're going to bankrupt, you know, public schools, and therein basically losing opportunities for other people. Nobody cares about that stuff anymore. These people have been in power for decade after decade after decade. The fact that you preside over a district where there's either a 3% proficiency rate in any subject, or, like in Baltimore where they have 50, 60, 70% dropout rates, you shouldn't be qualified to speak anymore. You should be banned. Like, how we censor, politicians when they shouldn't speak? We should be able to censor whoever, runs these establishments and runs these school districts whenever they have numbers that are so atrocious, because we don't need to hear from them anymore. We need people in there that are actually serious about getting this done, actually have.
They get a failing grade. They get a failing grade.
Absolutely. Well, not only a failing grade, you're fired. Like,
yes.
You're lucky I don't even go more extreme than that, because you're literally the cause of generations of kids, especially that look like me, failing, being put from the school to prison pipeline, dying in the streets, getting hooked on drugs. They are the reasons, not only just the schools, but the corruption that they preside over and they continue to accept and perpetuate throughout our communities. So we really are in a time, and that's why I love what President Trump had to say a lot of the times. And one of his famous lines that I really love is, "What do you have to lose?" I thought that was the perfect sentiment when he asked black people that. And of course you had some of them come out and say, "Oh my God, that's so racist." What's racist about that? Like, we really have to stop throwing around this racist charge. He asked you a real question, and it was a very real question. It was the right question to ask. What do you have to lose? Because from what I can see in my lifetime, he was the only one with a pulpit that big that actually came out and called the nonsense out for what it was, and actually is the one who gave people like me the opportunity and the platform to be able to speak to these things about you guys, to speak about these things to you guys now.
Darius, thank you so much for coming on to our show.
Oh, thank you.
Do you have any final words for our viewers, and where can people find you?
Yeah, you guys can find me, my website for the campaign, and you can donate to my campaign at www.dariusmayfieldforamerica.com. That's for spelled F-O-R. You can find my campaign Facebook page at Darius Mayfield for America, and again, that's F-O-R. And on Instagram, you can find me at Darius for America. That's the number 4. And on Twitter, you can find me at Mr. Mayfield USA. And I just like to say I'm honored to be doing this, so you guys know. I left my career, a career that I was very, very good at, that I was making a very, very healthy living, and I was able to provide myself with so much, being in that career for such a long time, coming from the automotive industry. But this opportunity and this fight is just so important for me, because at the end of the day, it's not just about me. It's about the generations coming up. It's about the rest of the country. It's about my nieces, my nephews, my goddaughters, my godsons. So again, to Republicans out there, I appreciate you guys, Republicans and conservatives. I appreciate you guys. I love you guys for the support you've shown me and for the maturity that you've shown, because I know everything that I've always come out with is not necessarily something you overwhelmingly agree with, but I think at the end of the day, you guys respect me for always being true to myself and telling it like it is. And to independents and Democrats out there, I would really just say, what do you have to lose? A vote for Darius Mayfield is a vote for America and common sense.
We hope this will help our viewers from New Jersey to stay informed and make the right decision for voting in the upcoming 2022 U.S. congressional elections. Darius, thank you so much for joining this episode of The Capitol on Live One TV.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure.